What is going on, everyone? It is Brian and Jordan. We're back with This Week in the House of Fraud. This is an original series for people who may or may not be a member of the community and want to actually stay up to date and hear what the voice of the community is actually really talking about. What's top of mind for fraud experts and fraud leaders today? Jordan, what's going on?
Hey, how you doing today, man? It's good to be back. I'm really enjoying doing this new series. I think it's super interesting. It's interesting to talk about what people are talking about too. I think like it's stuff that I don't normally think about, so it's taken me outside of my comfort zone. So I'm really enjoying like just these kinds of conversations, and it makes me want to get more involved in them on our actual site.
I mean, that's the power of it, of hearing really the voices of the community, getting kind of like the perspective of what people are really dealing with, of what problems like really do they face, and the nuances of like, hey, you see people talk about like, hey, ATOs and the what happens on an ATO on one platform versus the other, or the nuances of one kind of like business model can kind of change the dynamics and the powers and what you're actually able to do. Or like if there's a very specific point and reason of like you've uncovered the scam journey and why and how they're using your platform within the rest of the scammer's journey, to actually be like, hey, I know it's ATO and I'm
Yeah,
looking for this specific point. Like, I know what I want, but how do I do it? Is anyone else really out there? Like, am I going crazy? I think it's good for a pulse check, or like that
100%.
resource of being like, hey, I I don't know if I'm thinking about this right. Is anyone else dealt with this? How can I think about this? And
You
then
know,
setting up kind of private rooms like that.
what's like super crazy and think something that I think about a lot, especially like because I work from home, is like validating what I'm seeing is correct. Um, are others seeing it? Am I making things up when I see these patterns? That's a big thing that has always happened to me. So when I have these types of discussions where like either I put something up or somebody else posts something that's similar to what I'm seeing, validating that I'm not going crazy and that like I still got it and I still can spot the
At least in
patterns.
one realm.
Yeah, at least in one realm, I still got it somewhere. But, there was one this week, it's a very popular, very large FI, financial institution that was experiencing not ATO on their side, but appears to be ATO off their platform. But then people are transferring money into their platform and then immediately transferring the money out. So basically using them kind of like a money laundering stop along the way. And he was kind of asking, what other people were doing in those sorts of scenarios. Or also we're having problems, like the typical problem with mules. I think everybody's having the problem with mules where mules are doing it to try and put that layer between. But at the end of the day, it's still an off
I think
platform
that was one of the
account
pieces of like trying to
coming on.
understand of like how there's kind of two potential hypotheses here. Is it the scam route where someone has become victim and given over credentials, or have lost their credentials elsewhere out in the public, and someone has gained access to it and are now able to use this FI as a middleman? Or is it the legitimate user that now is acting on as a
Yeah.
mule
Romance
behalf,
scam.
either maliciously, yeah, like unknowingly, knowingly? That's sometimes hard to really kind of determine the behaviors in itself. Like when you're thinking about those, like you break them up into two different bits because the protection and detection is slightly different. The core
Yeah.
problem, like the fraud typology, hey, we have off platform ATO moving money, and however you want to categorize that. But that is like the starting point. But then you have these kind of two different routes of, is it a scam or mule? And can really, where and what you're really looking at least for like me, like if you're going the scam route, there's the assumption that it's a third party
Yeah. That's
who
that
has
was one of the things.
unauthorized access.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if I'm looking there, then you can kind of look a little bit more.
I
Well, it
would say that
depends what you
that's
have access to.
easier.
If it's a new account, but if it's new account makes it hard because you don't really have a true source yet
And that's what like I
of
think
information.
some of these like suggestions have been, and I think they would only attack the mule part, is like doing like using some services to do like bank account validation, like some sort of third party service, like does this account match? But if it's if
That gets
it's
into
like
a
a
tricky
scam
area
scam.
because if
Well,
some
if it's a scam,
FIs have
it's
policies to not police other people's activity and
100%,
use
and
them
that's
as
what I'm saying.
behavior, so
Like, if
that
Keanu
makes it
Reeves wants
hard.
to marry me and asks me to send him money to pay his power bill, like, it's still my account. Like, all the information is gonna check out because Keanu needs to keep his lights on, and I understand that at the end of the day. But so that wouldn't solve the problem at the end of the day. What I always call saving people from themselves. So, yeah.
Why'd that one stand out to you?
Uh,
Because
I just
obviously
think because
this one's a meaty one. Looking through,
it
like, the
is.
comments right
It
now
stood
and the
out.
suggestions from the people is definitely meaty.
Yeah, it stood out because we get a lot of like people asking if other people are seeing these sorts of things, which this is that, but usually it's more in e-commerce. This one is since it's a large FI and it's not quite ATO, it's like a different form of ATO. It just stood out to me because it's slightly different. I mean, it's not something we all see our sites be used for some sort of laundering or tumbling activity, especially if you're a marketplace. Like you see a lot more than you probably realize. But this one stood out to me just because I mean the company's pretty popular company, and I've been on a panel with the guy before. So, it did stand out a little bit to me, but I just thought it was more interesting because there is 2 parts. There is an actual criminal part, but there is a scam part where the actual real account holder could potentially be involved, which at the end of the day, which is I think the question that we're all wrestling with when
Yeah.
because we keep talking about scams is at what point do people have to be responsible for themselves? Like, if you could put as many hurdles in front of them as possible, if they jump them all, and at the end of the race, they still say, "Oh, it wasn't my fault that I lost." Like, at what point do we have to say, "Well, you should have ran a little faster, you should have done a little better." Like, where do we go with that,
Yeah, I'm reading through one
Checking it out.
comment because one comment is really
Large.
thorough. I'm trying to, like, synthesize it super quickly,
It
but
comes down to, do use third parties to do the validation, is what it really comes down to.
well, yeah, I mean, it'll always come down to data. The question kind of, if you simplify it, is like, what data am I missing to really detect this sooner? And that really kind of comes down to a lot. Whether you build it in-house or build it like you buy it, like the question is, where's the data coming from? Is it something we own or where like it'll always go there. But I'm looking at um
The education piece?
one of the more thorough, no, the comment in here.
Yeah, but
There's
he talks about
someone put
education
in a,
too.
yeah. Um yeah, the
Yeah.
mules piece and the scams piece, breaking down a couple different like pathways. Like this was a why this comment stood out to me
Oh,
specifically
you're
is,
talking
well,
oh, I
one,
see the
because
other
of
one.
the length and thorough.
I was reading the other one. My bad.
Yeah. Is it breaks down kind of like the logic of thinking why you might be thinking this route versus the other. Why you might be thinking this could be a scam versus why you might be thinking that this could be mules. And if you do think more this route, here are some first like ways to get visibility into it of like if you determine how to actually say like,
Yeah.
is this more than likely to be a mule or is this more than likely to be scams? Because the hard part here is if you have the resources to set out to solve this, but you might only be able to solve it one way versus the other. You need a hypothesis to say this is more than likely mules versus more than likely scams. Now, it's not that this couldn't be like a phased out project, but depending on the impact of this, like this could be meaty. And sometimes with sizes of companies, you never know the speed of how
Yeah.
people like navigating the business in itself. Actually, that's always like the big elephant in the room. Like I know I have the solution. I know how I want to solve it. I got great advice. I got great data. I know what I want to implement. But now I actually have to lay this out for people in the business to understand it. To like this for me, like as I'm thinking about it right now, how do you break this down to a non-fraud expert to get them to really care about this, especially if it's more of an emerging threat versus a threat that's been ongoing. So you've kind of compiled the dollar amounts and the impact downstream long enough to show like a bit. Once dollars get big enough, then you get people's ears. But the goal and the challenge for a lot of us in our space is like we're noticing that this is about to happen. How can we stop this before it actually happens, before it turns into the "I told you so" like,
Yeah.
environment, and
That's the
I think that
education
this
piece.
one kind of
Yeah.
falls more into this space of, like, how do I get leadership bought in to understand this meaty problem?
So, both of these, there's two large comments on there, and both of them do touch on like one of them says maybe force a customer to watch a video. And then the other one says like, education, which comes down to like all of the Zells and all the like the banks even that have participated in that are sending emails, how to protect yourself from scams, how to be aware of when people are asking you for these things and taking things off platform to try and send money that way. And it comes down to this education piece, but determined people are going to do it anyway, like no matter what. And I understand
Yeah,
that, like, I think the education, like we can say, you got to look out for these things. And then maybe there needs to be a warning of like, if you do it anyway, you might have to pay for it. But that's where regulation comes in over the top then, is where the government's then gonna come in and say, it doesn't matter if you told them every single thing that they could ever do. You literally said, "This is a scam, do not do this," and they did it anyway, you're still on the hook for it, you know? Like, there is so much that comes in with that. Like, at what point, like, do we have to throw our hands up and say, we're not even gonna participate in this at all anymore," or something like that, you know?
yeah,
Like, I don't know. There's just a lot. I mean, it's a fluid process and it's always evolving as more and more people and the amounts get higher and more common people. Like if you look at the numbers,
yeah,
like Gen Z is like really likely to fall for scams right now. We always make fun of it like it's grandma over in the corner with her Windows XP computer. But no, it's Gen Z that's falling for it the most, Like it's
yeah.
crazy. So I mean, I think it's gonna continue to evolve over the next couple of years. Depending on which way like the leadership goes at the end of the day. But it's gonna get worse before it gets better. That's my opinion.
That's, that comes into "I told you so," and that's the unfortunate part of, like, a lot of what we work in. We see a lot of the bad, and we see it growing and building until it gets to the point of when other people care. So, the challenge always, I think for me, with a lot of what the House of Fraud kinda stands behind, the newsletter, this public facing content, the private membership content is around finding those different angles. Like my true bit is like how to become a recognized fraud leader. That's what I kind of write a lot of my LinkedIn content around. Like that's my North Star problem because if I don't have attention, like attention is a game. And if I don't have attention, whether it's on LinkedIn, whether it's internally at my company, whether it's with a customer, client, consult, like if you're consulting with people, if you don't have people's attention, it's really
Yeah.
hard to drive impact. So, as much as people as much as I don't like playing games like that, if I don't wanna play the game, more often than not, I'm gonna lose the game, and I'm gonna lose attention, and it's gonna be hard for me to drive impact.
What else you got going on? What about you? Big.
This came from a chat, but it's very relevant to a lot of kind of themes. Obviously, I run the job board, so I get a lot of, like, career calls and meet and greets of learning about like, hey, what the job market is. If I want to break into this space, how do I do that? How do I make myself a better candidate? Uh, but this one's a little bit more nuanced, but I think relevant to a lot of people in the space right now. This individual's wants to look for a new job, is afraid of the job market, is comfortable in the role that they're in, but
Yeah.
don't feel challenged anymore, think they can make more money, um, but feel guilty looking for a new role. They don't necessarily hate where they're at, and they know there are people out there looking for a job. So it's really hard to remove for me, this is really hard to remove the emotional aspect. But if you think about it, like a lot of companies have laid off people in the last couple of years. And when it comes down to it, it's business. And whether we like it or not, really, no matter what your role is, because it's like senior executives are laid off all the time. It's like if you work for a company, you're a number, you're a line item on a spreadsheet, as much as that hurts to sound. But
Ha.
that's how I carry it to then really be able to look at it of like, I got to look out for myself, my family, depending on what your situation is, of like, I got to be my own agent. And now, just because you're happy, it doesn't hurt to look around and say, what is else out there? Interviewing is a skill. researching companies is a skill. So even if like you are passively looking or interested, would I be a good candidate on this market or not? Like it doesn't hurt to at least do a couple intro calls and start to build your network. Like it's okay to apply to
Yeah.
jobs. It's okay to just look at jobs. Like even if you don't want to apply, it's okay to look at jobs. Like even passively, like you never know. There might be that opportunity that was like, I didn't know this existed, but I can
Yeah.
make 20% more money at a company I want to work at. I have a friend that worked at this company. I would love to work with them again. If you weren't looking, you just aren't sure of what those opportunities would be out there. So I think it's really important to zoom out from just like one company of where you stand at. Like, even if you are happy, just having a pulse on the market. And what I see a lot over the last couple of years is heads down work in your own job. No kind of like work outside building relationships or having
Yeah.
like the visibility.
Yeah.
Lose job, become public, looking trying to start to build your network, get your job, and then go back heads down. So then you kind of have these micro bursts of different people popping up here and there of like showing their expertise. But what if we continue to show our expertise? And it doesn't necessarily, I'm not even saying create content. You can do it with like one-on-one situations. Like we could do it like you and I just happen to record our conversation. But this could just be a non-recorded conversation of you and I ranting back and forth about what we
Oh,
see, what we're
we'd be
hearing.
having this conversation whether we recorded it or not. Like, this conversation's happening every Tuesday.
Exactly. Exactly. So I don't know if you need who needs to hear this, but it's okay to look around. Even if you're happy, even if you're not going to apply, it's okay to look out for you.
So, when I was at my last job, before I got to this job that I'm at now, at a company called iHerb, I was very, very, very happy in my role at Ticketmaster. Like, I loved my job there. I loved my place. I was comfortable. I loved it. Everything about it. Um, I didn't seek this job that I have now. I was sought. They messaged me. But it goes to that same thing where, like, I always wanna hear what people are up to and what they're offering, just so I know where I'm at in my day. Like, am I
Yeah.
in the right spot? Am I in the right pay bracket? Am I in the right responsibility level? And am I in the right title? So I do listen, but I'm pretty upfront with like recruiters when they reach out to me, like my opinions of where I'm at. Like I'm happy or I'm sad, you know. But I will tell them, but I'll listen, you know, because I think it's responsible. And I'm pretty open with my own staff too. I'm so open with my staff that sometimes they do tell me, I interviewed at this place and you know, I have to in the back of my head be like, but at the same time, I'm like, and how did it go? What did you feel? And I'm happy to say that they understand that their life would suck if they left me. So
Yeah.
they stay. But I did have one at the Duke
But
company
being
that
open
did
like
try to
that, it
leave and came
allows you
back.
to have that feedback of like, hey, they are thinking about leaving. Why are they thinking about leaving? You
Yeah,
can get that feedback
we
right
go in
there. And you're
deeper
like, all right, can we do something here to give you what you're looking for?
because
Is
it's
it
what
something
are you
in the
looking
environment where
for?
it's
Like, what do you need?
exactly?
You know, like, but I will say like I think a lot of people understand, and I've had this conversation with my own boss recently. Is like we really like where we're at, all of us right now. We feel like we're exposed enough to the industry. We have enough autonomy to create what we want to create. Comp is great. The company is at the right point in its growth, you know, pre IPO, where like we feel like we still matter and we're not quite the number. We are
Yeah.
still a number on a spreadsheet. We are like everybody's a number on a spreadsheet, he said. But I at least like to think if I needed to ask my CEO a question, like he'll answer, you know, like
Yeah.
he will reply to me. And I would say like a lot of large companies, they don't necessarily do that, especially if you're like on a fraud team, which they've never even thought about fraud before. They've never even heard of a chargeback. They just look at the profit and loss statement at the end of the day. But so overall, like the mixture right now, the soup is a very tasty soup. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to change it to, but I see other people out there, like you said, to your point, that get so heads down and so comfortable in their role. And they've been in this role for years and years and years. And one of the things that happens is they get really good at identifying fraud on their site. So it gives them sometimes this false sense of, I can do it anywhere. So then when they do find themselves in a position where they're in a new role, they come in making suggestions without understanding a different type of business. that may
Yeah.
or may not work for that business as successfully as it did in their last role. They might not experience that success, which leads to feelings of imposter syndrome, feelings of like depression in the new role, and just anxiety in general. And that's where I think like I've been fortunate in my career is I've had a bunch of different experience along a bunch of different places. So like I feel fairly equipped, but at the end of the day, like there's new frauds and new scams every day that I don't see at my company that I
Yeah.
wouldn't know what to do with. I would have to listen to my employees. And that's one thing
I mean, we
that
just
is
talked
really good.
about
Yeah.
business hijacking last week.
Yeah. That's
We don't
true.
really
Yeah.
face that. I mean, we can kind of break it down of what it is, but then when you get into the nuances of, all right, when you is business hijacking, like when you get it from a strategic level
I
of
get it
just
from
talking the talk,
concept.
like,
Yeah.
yeah. But when you really get down into, okay, how do we execute the detection? That's where a lot of things go wrong. And I think that's what you see a lot of times with like consultants as well, especially when you're coming in of like, hey, here's my framework. I'm going to lay it on out strategically, theoretically, in the sales process, all looks and sounds good. But then when you get down into actually executing it, it's like, this doesn't really align with the business. This doesn't really align with like our operations. Like this sounded good. Now this kind of comes into the discovery. Like we'll talk about discovery another day, but I see that in a lot of kind of different angles from vendors, people changing roles, consultants, of like forcing a framework instead of like guardrails into it of like when it's time to actually execute your theory.
So as we begin to wrap up here today, we are doing a live event, a virtual live event. We're doing a live happy hour, community happy hour for members of the community. You want to talk about that a little bit?
I'll let you keep going, but I think the coolest piece to me is it's run by other people. It's not just run by us. Like people
Yeah.
came to us like, hey, this would be cool. Could we get up and running with this? And it's like, yeah, absolutely. Let's kind of run this. Like if the community sees the value within this of finding different ways to engage and bring each other and be connected, formal, informal, conversationally, whatever it may be, something in between of like, yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
Yeah. So yeah, on Thursday the 20th for people that are members of the House of Fraud, from 2 to 3 p.m. Pacific time. What's that? What's that? 5 to 6 your time over there on the
Five to
Eastern
six.
Seaboard. Yeah.
Yeah.
So bring your favorite beverage. If you don't have a membership, visit www.thehouseoffraud.com. Learn how to be a member. Brian will help you out with that. That's kind of what he does over there. Happy to keep doing these, talking about all this fun stuff. We'll see you next week.